Hey, what's going on everyone? Justin here, and I've already completed a video on my favorite ancient history and medieval history reads that I read in 2024, and it's not every year that I'm able to do a modern-ish, like best of or favorites video in history, just because I don't usually read enough to bother with. But yeah, I think I read 13, modern history book, or at least history over the year 18 or beyond the year 1800. So I was able to pick my top five, and that kind of thing. And a lot of that had to do with Historathon. So for those who don't know, it's a year-long reading initiative all about reading nonfiction history books. I'll leave a link to Vin's channel, Revenant Reads, as well as all the other co-hosts of this really cool history-based readathon, and the Discord where people talk about all the history stuff they're reading and whatnot. But let's just go ahead and get started with two honorable mentions. So first up is a World War I book by Edward Pace, World War I, The African Front, an Imperial War on the African Continent. Now, World War I was like one of the only topics I ever read that was, I guess, modern-ish. But I never read one dealing with any of the battles or campaigns or anything like that taking place in Africa. So it was kind of really cool seeing that. And a lot of even really good history books, such as G.J. Myers' A World Undone. Even he acknowledges, he's just like, I don't have the space. I think that's like a 900-page book or something, to really even like address that and stuff. So it was really cool seeing it, and it's just a complete juxtaposition compared to like what you think of when you think of World War I with the Western Front, with trench warfare. A lot of this stuff is just, units and things and armies just kind of being left to their own devices for months and literally years, like on end. And just kind of, how they had to kind of adapt and survive in tons of maneuver, I guess campaigns of maneuver and stuff. So not bogged down in trench warfare. But a lot of the battles too are like definitely more on the skirmish side compared to like the giant things kind of going on in the eastern and western fronts in Europe. So like I said, just kind of really interesting learning about kind of these different phases. Plus, I think one of my favorite takeaways is just kind of how, I guess, some of the weird scenarios that took place, such as a German battleship effectively being beached up a river, and then their kind of defense of that ship for a while, and then how the British had to use airplanes for kind of the first time in like some sort of offensive capabilities. Then ideas of using like airships to, traverse through Africa and everything like that. So a lot of just kind of weird, crazy stuff kind of going on. But like I said, just totally different from pretty much every other like aspect of World War I that I've ever read. And I enjoyed it. And then my other honorable mention here is The Enlightenment, The Pursuit of Happiness, 1680 by 1790 by Richie Robertson. And I'll say this was probably my favorite buddy read out of, I think, the four that I did during 2024. There was a group of us, John over at Nicholas of Autrecourt, leave a link. Actually, he's a co-host, so he'll already be down there as well. Kind of spearheaded this one. And I just thoroughly enjoyed it. This is like the 1700s. It's not really something I know too much about. I had kind of just like the basic outlines and stuff. But this book does a great job kind of walking through all the different kind of social, cultural, technological movements kind of going on during that century, and like kind of describing really what the Enlightenment was. Lots of really interesting figures going on throughout, reading about them and everything. So I particularly enjoyed the one on the scientific revolution, the big chapter on that. So highly recommend it. If you like big history books that you just do a deep dive and get a lot out of, this one would definitely be one for you. I think how many pages? This one's 900 if you count the end matter. Tons of notes. I think it's about 800 like actual text pages or so. Looks like 780 actual text pages, but like I said, highly recommended if you want to learn more about that time period. And then in no particular order, here are probably my top three, but I'm not going to list them like 1, 2, and 3. But first up, we have The Soviet Century, Archaeology of a Lost World by Karl Schlogel. And this was just a fascinating look at the entire breadth and scope of social life under the USSR for a whole wide variety of people living in cities, people living in the capital, people living in rural communities, people that are forced to go into like the gulags, all kinds of different stuff. But how did they how did they spend their free time on vacationing and stuff? For example, it's like a chapter. How did they spend money in black markets if they wanted to do that, stuff like that. So I found it really interesting. There's about 60, like kind of 60 different chapters on all kinds of different stuff, different building projects, different cultural things, all kinds of stuff. So I found it really interesting. Plus, it takes place throughout the entire history of the USSR, from its kind of foundations, the Second World War period, and then during the Cold War period up to its collapse as well. So, like I said, just kind of a lot going on. And maybe not perhaps for everybody, in the sense it's not always purely chronological. It's kind of, I would say, roughly the earlier stuff, it seems to be kind of earlier, and later is kind of like later in the book, but not purely chronological in the sense of like having like a I guess a chronological narrative, though you definitely have kind of the cultural narrative. I'd say there's definitely a big like social thread throughout the entire book. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I've never really read much on Soviet stuff, but I know a lot of people also enjoy Russian literature, and I think this would kind of pairs well, almost in a sense. Even though I know this is like 20th century, and a lot of famous like Russian literature is more 19th century. I don't know, I had like a brain freeze right then. But anyways, like I said, if you enjoy Russian history, you really have to like pick this up if you want to be like comprehensive there. Next up, we have something of a Civil War book. We got The Demon of Unrest by Erik Larson, a saga of hubris, heartbreak, and the heroism at the dawn of the Civil War. And this was my first Erik Larson book in quite a while, and I'd forgotten just how good wielder of primary sources that he is. So you have a bunch of, I think 3 or 4 grand narratives kind of all turning around kind of the lead up into the artillery bombing of Fort Sumter in Charleston Harbor that kind of launches off, kicks off the Civil War. So you got perspectives from the aristocracy in Charleston, you got the garrison commanders in Fort Sumter, and then you kind of got like Abraham Lincoln's kind of what's going on in his mind as far as like running for a re-election running for election and that kind of thing. And it was interesting just learning about, like I said, I think I said before, kind of the comedy of errors that's going on during this time period where both sides really haven't kind of read the writing on the walls yet and not taking it as seriously as maybe they thought. Just for example, one of each, the militia in Charleston is, practicing and whatever, and doing their maneuvers and stuff, and they accidentally do fire a literal cannon at Fort Sumter, like presumably on accident, because they were told to like start the attack or anything. This is like months before, and they have to like send over a little boat and like under the white flag and everything, go like, we apologize, blah 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 blah, and everything. It's all like super chivalrous and aristocratic, and they're like, oh yeah, we'll accept your apology and everything. And then for the North, for example, they try to evacuate Fort Sumter kind of on a rescue mission, and the ship that the enlist for the role for that is already, like, they gave it 2 separate missions at the same time, so it's already left to go do something else, like in the Gulf of Mexico or around Florida. I can't remember exactly off the top of my head. And then it gets like overrun by like a messenger ship, and they're like, yeah, this is like definitely a trick, we're not gonna go steer off course and go do that. So it's just so wacky kind of reading. It would be funny if it wasn't so serious, if that makes any sense. But like I said, I think his use of primary sources just really well done. Just a really engaging history book, and I know a lot of people enjoy Civil War stuff, so definitely check that one out if you like Civil War. And then I'd say probably my favorite here was The Pursuit of Power, Europe 1815 to 1914 by Richard Evans. And this is in the Penguin History of Europe series. And I used to enjoy learning about the long 19th century a long time ago, which is kind of the era between Napoleon and World War I. And I'd kind of just fallen off the wayside, forgotten just a lot about it. And this book filled in all the gaps again. Just super well done. I was really pleased that it wasn't just a purely political military narrative. Obviously, a lot of that stuff is included, but generally I think there was 8 or 10 major like units. Hold on one sec. And they kind of alternated between like 8. So 8 really I think it's like 8 like 80-page chapters basically. And they kind of alternate between kind of driving the narrative forward politically and then a big like unit on kind of like social, cultural, technological advancements and stuff. And that's kind of, that was a big takeaway. Was just remembering how in the 1800s, how as far as like technology was concerned and stuff, just how much the world was changing for like the everyday life of like regular people, between like railroads and then eventually kind of electricity kind of coming to the fore, and stuff like that. Telegraphs and everything, just better ships and everything to communicate better, and it started to become more like globalized and whatnot. And a lot of figures that I gotta like add to my list of finding like biographies for such as like Metternich. I enjoyed like the coverage of Bismarck. I've read a little bit on him, but just reading about his like I didn't realize like how much of a hypochondriac he was and stuff like that. But I just thoroughly enjoyed it, and I encourage anyone that's interested in the 1800s to pick up this book as well. So there you have it. Those are my 5 favorite modern works, or not modern works, my favorite books that I read in 2024 on modern-ish history. So I'm counting modern-ish. It's like anything beyond the medieval period, apparently, but that's why I put the ish in, because I know the Enlightenment is kind of stretching modern a little bit. But anyways, let me know if you've read any books dealing with these time periods down below, and if you really enjoyed them, so I can definitely check out what they are, because it's definitely my weakest period in history compared to the other two. But whatever you're reading, whether it's modern history or not, always remember, read victoriously.